Hey everybody, welcome to part 1 of the sew along for Vogue pattern VP640. In this particular episode, we're going to be talking about the pattern itself. If you're interested in knowing more about patterns and how to choose them and what all the information mean, then definitely click up here because in this particular episode, I tell you all about patterns and it's very beginner friendly. So anyways, for this particular sew along, let's dive into the pattern and let's see what we can get from it, and as we prepare for the sew along itself. So when you get a pattern from the store, it comes in an envelope like this, and usually in the front of the envelope it tells you the pattern name, VP. Here is the Vogue pattern 640. It tells you if it's easy or if it's the difficulty level of the pattern. And then it tells you the size of the pattern. This one, the size goes from 14 to 22. There are two views that you can make from this pattern. They're very similar. Essentially, one is long and one is short. And then when you go to the back side of the pattern, you see more about the sizes. And then it tells you all the different ranges of size for the particular pattern. And you have to know, what size the pattern that you have is, because this one has 6 to 12, but it's not covered in this pattern. 14 to 22 is what's covered in this pattern. Once you open the back side, it tells you a description of the pattern, and then it tells you what kind of fabric you can make the pattern with, you can make the dress with, and then it tells you more about the sizes and the amount of material that you need. For example, for a size 14, which is what I'm making, you have a 2.5 yards for 45-inch fabric, and then you have a 1 3/4 for a 60-inch fabric. And then when you go down a little bit, it tells you the difference between the views and what you have to do to achieve the different looks. So the notions part tells you about what is required to make the fabric. So it will tell you if you need like a zipper, what size of zipper, and if you need like a hooks and eye, or if you need like fusible interfacing, it will tell you all of that. So with all of this information, let's go on the inside of the fabric and see what information we can get from the pamphlet that we find. So once you open the pattern and you pull out the pattern papers, you are greeted with a very detailed information of what you need to work with this pattern. So usually on the top, you start with the different views that you can get in the pattern, and then you see the pattern pieces, usually laid out in numbers. And then you will see, when you go lower, what you require, the pieces you require for the different views. And on the very bottom of that first page, you see like the body measurements that correspond to your pattern size, and that's where you would measure yourself and then you compare it to the measurement that is there. It's always advisable if you're between sizes to go up, because you can always take it down a notch when you sew later. So right here you have to look for your size, and what you're seeing here is a layout of your pieces on your fabric to help you optimize the fabric, right? Because you have a certain length of fabric and you need to kind of fit all of your pieces there. So my size is 14, so the length of my fabric is 60, so I'm going to be using this particular layout pattern to help me optimize, to get the most out of my fabric. And usually when it's laid out, you see an SL, which is a selvage edge, and you see the P, which is the folded edge, and I'm going to show that later. And then here what I'm showing you is essentially an illustration of the kind of things and shadings that you see in the pattern or the fabric. So you have to take note that there is a difference between the shadings on the pattern and the shadings on the fabric. It also tells you a seam allowance that is applied to the pattern. Usually it's 5/8 of an inch, except you're told otherwise. And times where it will be different would be when you're trying to sew the hem of your fabric, for example, or the fold on your sleeves. That might have a different edge. Then after that, you get like a step-by-step instruction of how to assemble the different pieces of the pattern. So inside of the pattern, you also have this brown foil paper that the pattern is printed on, and the lines that you see there correspond to the different sizes for the garment, and so you have to trace your size and make sure that you're cutting along along the lines for your size throughout the patterns in this particular envelope. So for me, I'm size 14, so I'm going to be making sure that I identify size 14 as I walk through all of the patterns and I cut along that 14 line. And so you have to be very careful because this usually comes in like a couple of sheets, and like different patterns based on sizes may be on different sheets. So my advice is first identify the sheet that has the patterns that you need, mark them out, and then go ahead and start cutting the pattern pieces. Also, if you're in between sizes and you're very particular about like getting a very good fit, you might consider actually tracing those patterns between the different lines. For example, if your top is a 14 but your hips is a 16, then you might, if your waist is a size 14 and your hip is a size 16, you might want to kind of interpolate between those sizes to be more representative of your body. So here I have my fabric laid out, and when you have it laid out like that, if you have horizontal or vertical lines, you want to make sure that they're dead straight, right? Because you want to make sure that when you're done with your garment later, that it doesn't begin to pull to one side. So try your best to make your lines as horizontal as possible. I'm using stretch fabric for this. I love stretch fabric because it's very forgiving. You can kind of mess up. You have a little bit more tolerance on your sides if you use stretch fabric, because you can always squeeze inside of the dress. But for me, it's a thick and stretchy fabric on 4 sides, and I love that. It's my favorite fabric type of fabric to work with. And then what I want to show here as well is here you have the folded edge, and then on the other side, which is the FP, so I'm showing you the FP, and then the selvage edge. This is usually the edge where the fabric is finished, and I'm going to show you so folded edge and selvage edge. Yeah, so that's where you have like the finishing of the fabric and where you usually have the markings on the fabric. And it's important to know that, because when you put your fabric together, you want to make sure that you're folding it properly. So a very important part that you have to take note of is the shadings on both the pattern and the shadings on the fabric. So for the shadings on the fabric, the right side is usually shaded, the wrong side is plain. However, for the pattern, the wrong side is shaded and the right side is plain. And this is very important for you to know when you're laying out your fabric and when you're folding your fabric, because you want to make sure that when you cut the fabric, when you cut the pattern and you cut the fabric, that it is cut properly so that you can sew the right side, the correct sides together. So notice here that with these patterns I've laid out, the pattern 7 and pattern 2 are actually facing down, and the wrong side is facing up, kind of following the guidance from the pattern instructions. Well, I hope you find that helpful, and if you did, please smash that like button and subscribe to my channel so you know whenever I have one of these sew-alongs for you. I try to make them very detailed so that beginners can actually follow step by step and be successful. So don't forget to leave me a thumbs up, leave me a comment, let me know what you want me to cover in terms of sewing techniques in basic sewing. So anyways, get your pattern, get your fabric, get ready, and I hope to see you in the next episode. Peace out.